Hey folks, John Adamson with Seeking Light. This is take two. Yes, I'm wearing a hat and I'm wearing flannel on a hot day outside, sitting in a tent we have in our yard. The hat I made, little story behind that is I had found an old tweed jacket for really cheap and I've been wanting one of these. It's called a flat cap or newsboy. It's a 1910s, 1920s style hat, so it's pretty cool. Anyway, wanted to talk a little bit about Novavax. And the reason for this is it just received emergency authorization, utilization, or use approval from the FDA. And the Novavax vaccine is the latest in the so-called combat against COVID disease. And the question that I immediately have when I read the release information was, is this ethical for a Christian to take? And I'm going to argue to some extent that it would be a no. Now, one of the things that the general media has been promoting is that this may be a vaccine that mitigates any resistance to vaccination by certain people who have been anti-vaccine so far. Now, I say anti-vaccine in that anti-COVID vaccination, and most specifically targeting the mRNA vaccines. So the mRNA vaccines, you might already know, what they do is they introduce an RNA, or ribonucleic acid molecule, that is meant to cause the cell to produce antibodies against the spike proteins of the COVID disease, or SARS-CoV-2 virus. And one of the ethical concerns related to that has been the use of abortive fetal tissue in the development phase, in the testing phase of those mRNA vaccines. And this has been prevalent in other ones too, like the Johnson & Johnson, which is not mRNA technology, still had testing done to determine its efficacy. So now we've got this new one from Novavax, and it is not mRNA. It actually uses the actual virus to cause the body to have an immune response to create its own antibodies. And what it's being promoted as is a vaccine that was developed without the use of abortive fetal tissue. So the question becomes, is it ethical for a Christian to utilize it? Now, there is one research group, I wish I remembered off the top of my head the name of them, but they actually investigated this claim that this is not utilizing abortive fetal tissue, and they did confirm that an outside lab that used the HEC 293, which stands for Human Embryo Kidney 293rd such subject, abortive fetal tissue to confirm the efficacy of the vaccine, the Novavax. And that in and of itself might not be problematic. And the reason I say that is this. One of the things that's been argued is that those who are pro-lifers who would say, I'm not taking the vaccine because of abortive fetal tissue, must also, using the same criteria for evaluation, not take medications such as Tylenol or aspirin, because those medications have been tested on abortive fetal tissue. However, that is a false, I should say that's a problematic conclusion, because, for example, aspirin, we knew in the 19th century not only the use of aspirin, but the desired outcome of aspirin. For the most part, well before the first abortive fetal tissue line was available for testing, which was 1951. So, and same thing with Tylenol, the same thing with, I think it's Maalox, or one of the GI medications you can take has been known its efficacy for treating certain diseases well before fetal tissues came around. And then the further testing with fetal tissue after the marketing of a certain drug doesn't make that the use of that drug necessarily unethical for the Christian. So I, as a Christian, believe I can use Tylenol not only effectively but also ethically as a Christian, because the testing that was done with it on aborted fetal tissue is well after its established efficacy for treatment of certain things. Whereas the mRNA technology utilized in the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, part of the confirmation testing that helped bring about the emergency use authorization was on abortive fetal tissue. And it does appear that the new vaccine that was developed also used an outside entity to speed up the process of emergency use authorization through the FDA. So that brings about ethical concerns for the Christian. The other concern is just the introduction of a material into your body that might have side effects. And emergency use authorization bypasses the typical long-standing or long-term studies that establish the safety of something. And there are some early studies that are showing, and these are available online, easily found, that have found that this particular new vaccine has been associated with a low risk, an emphasis on low risk, of the same issues that we've seen with the Moderna and Pfizer, which include cardiac issues and neurological issues, especially in younger individuals. So emergency use does not indicate long-term safety or long-term efficacy. So a Christian and non-Christian has certainly a right to question whether or not it's ethical to go ahead and use these medications, even though they have the emergency use authorization, or EUA. So that is definitely a big concern. The other concern is, even though it does not cause a potential mutation of the cellular DNA, which is one of the things that the mRNA technology has been accused of, there is interaction between this new Novavax vaccine and the cellular building blocks, the RNA, and in turn, potentially the DNA. So long term, do we know what the DNA impact is going to be from the Novavax? Novavax, yes, I said it right. No, we don't. And so that does afford the Christian or non-Christian the right to ethically challenge whether this EUA is appropriate. And then lastly, I would just say this. Why the emergency? Why is it an emergency to authorize another vaccine when we've already found that the variations in the disease are outstripping the current technology's capability of keeping up with it to create new vaccines that have any long-term efficacy? Because none of the vaccines so far have proven long-term to be efficacious. Also, because we have moved well beyond the initial scariness of the disease with the alpha and the delta variants that were so deadly. And if you look at the World Health Organization's tracking of deaths across the world from COVID, you can definitely see from the start of the tracking a massive upspike in the deaths, and now we're seeing a plateauing. So we're seeing much less death occur, and it's starting to parallel the numbers that you would find, like the World Health Organization would report on annual flu deaths. Now, I'm not saying that flu is not a serious thing for those with comorbidities and complexities, but what I am saying is, why would we push vaccination with the Novavax when we don't have the same push for flu, which now we have an analogous death rate? We still also see the warning signs that COVID death rates are vastly overreported. We also see warning signs that COVID vaccination injuries are still underreported. So why are we emergency authorizing another vaccine when we still see, when we're seeing data pour in of the lack of long-term efficacy, the concern over long-term safety from previous iterations of emergency use authorized vaccines. We just don't know enough. We don't know enough to say with certainty that these things will not cause problems. And then I thought of another issue while I was talking about this, related to my ethical concern about this. And that is just the declaration of an emergency period when it comes to healthcare. And I'm going to bring up, this is what I wanted to bring up, the CMS ETS. That stands for Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services Emergency Temporary Standard. It is still in effect. What it causes, those providers of services to Medicare and Medicare patients, it causes them to meet certain federal criteria for the delivery of care to their patients. And one provision is that they must have a comprehensive policy to deal with COVID in place. And that has affected employment for quite a few healthcare providers. In fact, some healthcare providers have had to seriously curtail the provision of their health services because they have healthcare providers refusing the vaccine and being terminated. And now there have been a lot of providers like myself who have gotten a religious exemption from the COVID vaccines that have been historically available because of mainly the issue of abortive fetal tissue utilized in the development and testing phases. Now that Novavax has come out, or Novavax, and has publicly stated they do not utilize abortive fetal tissue in the development and the testing phases of their vaccine, and it has been accepted carte blanche by the news media as to be the case. And we're also seeing the federal government giving this emergency use authorization. We are probably going to see revisiting by certain healthcare organizations of those employees who have religious or conscientious objection against the vaccine based on the use previously of the other vaccines of abortive fetal tissue, saying, oh, well, now we have Novavax. It doesn't use abortive fetal tissue. It's been approved. Therefore, to continue employment, you need to get this vaccine because your previous conscientious objection against the vaccines was based on abortive fetal tissue. We will no longer recognize that. We're going to revisit that now. And I see that as problematic. One, from what I said earlier, because an independent group did determine that abortive fetal tissue was utilized in the testing phase of the Novavax. But the question is, did that cause the Novavax to achieve emergency use authorization or not? But, obviously, the abortive fetal tissue concern is just one concern that many of us have about the force of receiving a vaccine, of being forced to receive a vaccine. And I am going to be doing very soon, I haven't picked the date, I hope to look at this tonight, of when I'm going to be offering my applied ethics medical mandates course online, free of charge to whoever wants to attend, all 2 hours of course, free of charge, just because I want to get the information out there in a more consolidated form than what I've already posted on YouTube. So anyway, just some things to think about with the Novavax. And I think we need to start this conversation because no doubt we're going to start seeing employers push for Novavax to conscientious objectors of the vaccines previously offered. We're no doubt this conversation is going to come to the healthcare arena, and people are going to be propagating this narrative. Oh, this is totally ethical to use because it doesn't use abortive fetal tissue. It is not mRNA technology with its associated risks. But hopefully I've spurred you to think about some of the true ethical concerns we can have about this particular new vaccine. Anyway, this is John Adamson with Seeking Light. Thanks for joining me today. Hope you have a great day. Take care. God bless.